is importing the data. Is that pretty straightforward now? I gave you the commands. You run the commands, and looking at your data is one way to make sure that it all came in okay. The columns command and that. All right. So, does somebody want to? Well, here let's. I can show you how I did it. But somebody. Here we go. Somebody want to tell me how they did it and they got it to work, or if you didn't get it to work. Let's type in the code. So, fast. So what did somebody? Sorry, you can't really read this yet, can you? Anybody get it to work? So what did you type in for this statement to get the ABF1 fast peaks?
You need a data frame.
You need a data frame.
And then you have to make up a list, so you need parentheses.
This is not.
It's capital F.
Is it a capital F there? You made a list?
Yeah. And then parentheses again for the first group. And then typing what you already have, the data from above, the data graphic transfers back in.
Okay. Yeah. TF. Oh, and this equals.
Yeah.
That's what you did. Okay.
Yeah, and then outside the parentheses, a comma. And then you need to see if it's fast or slow, so you have to look in the fast slow column. So it's data graphics parentheses. Fast.slow, capital S.
Slow.
And then that one you want to equal fast.
Fast. Okay. Let's see. Oops, I left out a bracket there. Thanks. All right. Great. So is that what you did?
I think so.
Okay. Let's take a look. There. Did I leave out a? See at the end. Is that what you typed? Did you?
Mine didn't get an error.
You didn't get that. I'm just trying to see what I. Oh. Sorry. Oh. All right. I ran these commands in the other thing. Sorry. There you go. All right. Let's take a look at this, and then so great. This is. There we go. All right. So let's see what you got. ABF1 fast. So do you want to? All right. So let's just type this in here and let's take a look. Is that what you?
Yeah.
Is that what you got there? All right. So that's giving us a data frame with a lot of columns, right? And it's and your values are true false values. Is that what you ended up?
That's what I had.
Yeah. Right. So let's think about this for a minute. What we have here. Let's just break this down. Right. So let's take the statements from the inside and let's go out and see what you got. So that's the best way to see what went. Let's TF ABF1. All right. So great. It's a list of true and false statements. Right. All the way down. So this inner statement here gives you a list of true and false statements, one for each row of that data frame. And then you put it inside parentheses. Right, so if we put it inside parentheses, what do we get here? Basically, yeah. So So you have, essentially here, you have a list of true and false statements in the first part in your list here, within our brackets. Then we have comma, and you have another list of true and false statements. So it's taking those true and false statements and combining those into a data frame.
So it should be like and anything?
Well, so what's missing here is you're giving it a list of true and false statements, this, your Boolean statement, but you're not actually telling it where to pull the data from. Right? So you're going to need something, so let me show you how I solve this. And so this is, so here I essentially have the same thing that you have inside here, except it's, we have an and, because we want a case where both things are true. But that Boolean statement now sits inside of these indexing brackets for data. So what you've constructed here is a set of true and false statements using this Boolean, these Boolean statements. And those true and false statements then are used, it's essentially kind of like the masks that you've used before to tell you which rows to pull out of data here. So what we're missing here, you're really close, what we're missing here is we don't have any place telling the data frame, any place where you're actually pulling the data from, right? You have a series of true and false statements. So if you put, well, we have a comma there, right? So this is essentially this here. If you put in your and then in that case we don't need these brackets anymore. Where'd that go? Then you get ADF. Fast. Does that make sense? Any questions about how we did this?
Does it add it in at the end? Where does it?
So what's happening?
Why don't we want to?
So you're not using data frame?
We're not using data frame in this case. Now we're extracting data. Yeah, so that I can see it's definitely something's going on here that's not obvious. So we're not explicitly calling the data frame function. We are taking a subset out of a data frame. And when you take a subset like this, we're selecting certain rows. It's creating a new data frame out of that. So actually that's a good point. Let's go back to some of our indexing here that we did. So let's try G. Let's just go back to our review before. Now we have a data frame, data, right? What if we give it a column, right? TF. We get that. What is our data type here? Type G. We get a series, right? So you've pulled out one column, it treats that as a series. Now what happens if we pull out several rows and columns? We did 1 through, 0 through 100, 0 through 100. So now we're taking out there aren't 100, let's see, 3. There aren't 100 columns. Now we're pulling out multiple rows and columns. What does it give us? It gives us a data frame. So when you pull out multiple rows and columns from a data frame, it's put into a variable that is itself a data frame. So this raises a good point because that's
you have to pull it out first and then use the data frame.
Sorry?
You have to pull it out first and then use the data frame.
You don't even need to use the data frame command there. It will create it automatically for you from another data frame.
So since we already have a data frame, we're just taking whole parts of that data frame
and pulling it out, and so Pandas creates that as a new data frame without you having to explicitly call the data frame
time
function.
when we used data frame before, it was because we were actually making it out.
You were actually making it out of a dictionary or a list or anything. This is great. I'm glad you brought this up because this is a critical point. This stuff is kind of invisible here.
A simpler example might even be just with a list. You make a list with brackets and you can take a slice out of that list. Just give me the first 3 elements of the list. And you get a new list back that's just containing those first 3 parts. So something like, I don't know.
Yep, let's say 1, 2, 4, 5. So let's say H equals G 0 through 3, right? And then let's ask what the type of H is. What does this? It's a list.
So when you change it from variable to variable, types don't change. Or is it certain cases?
It's not. It's certain cases. I mean, it has to fit, right? So if here, if we're just pulling out a column, in this case here, like this, you get a series. The type is changing because you've just pulled out a single column. A single column is not a data frame.
And the same thing with the list, too. If you pull out a single number,
Yeah. Yep.
it's a number. If you pull out 3 numbers, it's got to be some kind of container holding 3 numbers, which is your list.
Excellent example. Yeah. See, integer here. So the types can change depending on what you pull out. You know, that can be non-intuitive. Yeah. So that's what's essentially going on here. We've pulled out rows and columns, and so it creates the new variable is a data frame object. If you pull out just a row or just a column, it's going to give you a series. Hopefully that's not too confusing. It's a critical point. So everybody seemed to have these Boolean statements down. We're pretty close to the Boolean statement, right? We have 2 conditions. We want our row. Did that make sense? We have one condition. In one column, you need to see this value, and in the other column, you need to see this value. And then the outcome as of this, as we saw before, is a series of true and false statements. And those true and false statements then tell you which row, whether the row is going to be grabbed and put into this data frame. All right. So, did somebody else have another approach that you want to look at to pulling the results, pulling out the AVF1 fast peaks? Are we all good? All right. Okay, so it turns out that I made an activity that is way too long for the class period. So we're going to turn that into homework after Thursday. I will reformat this notebook. I'll put it up there, and you can walk through the rest of the exercise there. So what I like about this activity that I want to emphasize is this is a real problem that comes up over and over. You have in genomic data analysis. You'll have 2 sets of sequences, and you want to know if they overlap. You may have ChIP-seq data for 2 different transcription factors. You want to know, are they close? Do they overlap? So this is a type of data analysis you'll use over and over. And what I want you to get out of this activity is that using the fairly simple concepts that we've gone through already, and then the somewhat complicated concepts of data frame indexing, you can perform these analyses pretty easily. So I will turn that into a homework. So we'll stop at task 1 here because there's something else I would like to introduce. And this is a question that came up in homework 5. Here we go. Let's go back to our syntax review. All right. So what I want to talk about now is what happens to variables that are inside of a function. So we're going to talk about a concept called scoping here, and the way people like to describe it is, what happens inside of a function stays inside of a function, or it should stay inside of a function unless you return it. So that's basically the idea. So let's look at a simple example here. We've defined this function before. Multiplies. It takes 2 numbers and multiplies them, right? And inside of the function, we've assigned the result of that multiplication to a variable named v. So what happens, let's see. We're gonna restore our return object. So what happens to V when the function is done executing? Anybody have any idea? What do you think? You plug two numbers in. The result gets assigned to the variable V. The value is returned. So what happens? All right. Well, let's try it here. Let's try two numbers. Here's our function. Let's multiply two numbers, 1 and 10. All right, it gives us 10. All right, where is V? It doesn't exist. What happened to V? So V was a variable that was called inside of the function, and it disappeared when the function was done. So in this return statement, when you talk about returning V, you're actually not returning the variable V. You're returning the value that was in that variable, and then once this function is done, you don't have access to V anymore. It's gone. All right. So what if we did this now? Let's try it again. What if we defined a variable V out here? V equals 50. We do this. All right. Any predictions about what V is going to be now? 50, right. So how did that work? Yeah, so this is actually a separate variable out here. So this V lies in what's called our global namespace, our main environment outside of the function. The V inside of the function is in the local namespace, what we call it. It remains inside of the function. So this can get confusing. Now, what if we do this? Let's change this up a little different. Let's change this up. Yeah, let's do it this way. And this is something that cropped up in the homework. All right, we'll try a different variable. Now, here's an exception. Maybe this will. Hopefully not too confusing. We already defined A up there, so let's call it V2 here. We're going to define, never mind, here we go. V2, okay, we got that. We're going to define this function. So let's define V. Let's define, forget about this. Let's define V2 equals 50. So is the function going to work or not if I do this? Remember, so the function calls, invokes the variable V2 inside of it. You think it'll work or not? Predictions, will it work? Not work? All right. This is where things get really confusing. So it actually works, right? So a function can reach out and grab a variable that's in our global namespace. But that can get really confusing, and so I want to warn you generally not to do this in your code, right? You should not, when you're defining your variables inside of your function, keep things what happens inside of a function should stay inside of a function unless you return it. So it is possible to reach out and grab something.
How does that work if the function is in the cell before?
If the function is in the...
Because normally when you redefine a
Oh, right,
variable,
okay.
it doesn't go back, right?
Yeah, so you mean if we do this first?
No, like how you have V2 equal to 50. If the function is in the cell before, how does it still know that V2 is 50?
Oh, so when you define the function here, it doesn't care whether V2 exists or not at this point, because you're not calling the function. You're just defining how it's going to work when you call it. This doesn't actually create any of these variables yet. So let's do this. Here's an example. Let's try V3. So, okay, so now I'm executing this field here. So there's V3. Does the variable V3 actually exist? In this case, V3? No, it doesn't yet, right? So it won't exist until we run the function. So, or, you know, here, even do it this way. V3 equals 50. This will make a little more sense. We've assigned it inside there. It still doesn't exist, right? It's not going to exist until we call multiplies. I mean, this function's now nonsensical at this point with the parameters, but hopefully you get the idea here. Right, and so we entered,
V3 still doesn't exist.
it still doesn't exist, right? We haven't assigned. Oh, right, because that's not what I meant to do this. Here we go. Okay, let's run the function. We got that. Now let's try V3. Here we go. Doesn't exist anymore, right? What happens inside the function stays inside the function. All right, so that's a brief introduction to the idea called scoping. So you'll notice in some of the activities, you know, you can sometimes we let things slide just for sometimes it's easier to code if you're just making a function for that particular script and you want to call a variable that already exists outside the function. Yeah, you can do it. We all do it at some point. But in general, you want to be aware of what's going on. You want to avoid it, especially if you're going to reuse your function. Any questions about that? Okay. Well, let's call that good for today. We only made it partway through the activity, so I'm going to